Today we're going to be talking about 4.2 energy flow. So I just want to bring your attention really quickly to the word flow. We're going to be talking about the difference between recycling and flowing. So energy only flows through an ecosystem because eventually it ends. So that's the key with the word flow. Nutrients get recycled, which is going to be coming up more in the lecture, but pay attention to this word flow. Also, I wanted to show you this really quick with this book here where it says why big fierce animals are rare. This also has to do with the idea that because energy eventually runs out, the larger animals or the higher on the food chain animals, there can only be so many of them because there's not enough energy to help maintain them. So let's get going into this topic. All right, so before we get into it, I have a few slides just to review stuff from 4.1 because we haven't talked about it in a little while. So looking at our vocabulary here, producers, remember, or autotrophs are known as usually the bottom of a food chain. And then you have up here the word consumers, which remember are going to be anything that ingests organic matter, which is living or recently killed. So we usually have multiple levels of consumers. So remember, producers are going to be the plants, okay? Then they're going to pass energy to the primary consumer, which is usually an herbivore who doesn't eat meat at all. Then the secondary consumer, which can be a carnivore or an omnivore, something that eats plants and meat. And then to a tertiary consumer, which is usually mostly a carnivore organism. So you can see some examples of different food chains here from a forest, a woodland, the Arctic, snowy biome, and then a freshwater ecosystem. So notice that there's always a producer, some sort of a photosynthetic organism at the base, and then moving into the primary consumers, secondary consumers, and so forth. Food chains, here's this definition here. Food chains show the flow of energy. Notice I boxed that word. So they're only showing the flow of energy through the different trophic levels of a feeding relationship. The flow, remember, meaning that it's going to run out. It's just showing you the directional flow. So notice the arrows are pointing to who gives energy to who, not who eats who. So since this flower down here, the yellow iris, is going to give energy to the caterpillar next, the arrows pointing from the plant to the caterpillar, and so forth. It's never going the other direction. Food webs. Remember, food webs are basically a diagram that's going to show you multiple food chains within that ecosystem. It's great because you can understand the ecosystem at a higher level. Remember, these are some rules about what an advantage is to a food web over a food chain, which is much more simplified. There's more than one producer usually represented in a food web supporting a community. So here, don't get thrown off by this circle here around the krill. The photosynthetic organisms are over here. So the diatoms here, the microplankton, and then the macro algae here. Okay, those are going to be our producers, who then are passing on energy to other organisms. So like the detritus, and then to the krill, and then the krill to this humpback whale, for example. The krill is circled because it's a keystone species in this ecosystem. So a single producer being a food source for a number of primary consumers, hence the krill. Okay, you can, sorry, the krill's not a producer, but these different phytoplankton and the microalgae, notice that they are a food source for multiple organisms. A consumer may have a number of different food sources on the same or different trophic levels. So a consumer might be eating at different levels in the different food chains. So it's not just always one food chain. One food chain is going to show you just one path that the energy may go, but remember that in a food web, you can see interactions between multiple. And then a consumer can be an omnivore, feeding as a primary consumer, and as a consumer at a higher trophic level. So you can move your position within a trophic level pyramid as well. And then our last review slide is, remember that matter is cycled in an ecosystem. So energy flows because it runs out, but matter or nutrients like carbon, for example, is recycled or cycled. It keeps flowing through the ecosystem. All thankfulness to decomposers, or the process of decomposition, which remember is the process of which organic matter is broken down into a simpler form. This allows for the formation of soil, which is going to be packed with nutrients that plants can then use in their processes of doing photosynthesis and growth. Remember, there's two types of decomposers: saprotrophs, which are usually a fungus, and they secrete digestive enzymes and they eat externally, where there's detrivores, which have to ingest in order to eat. So they're both decomposers. They're both essential to the flow of nutrients through ecosystems, which would otherwise just accumulate as debris if we didn't have them to break them down, and then matter wouldn't cycle without these decomposers. So just to remind you, you guys made a carbon cycle diagram. Notice that you guys did talk about there was a feeding relationship. So when there was photosynthesis would happen to the plants for energy flow, and then the energy from the plant would go to this sheep right here, and then eventually they would die and be decomposed and it would go into the soil. That's showing you energy flow. But there's lots of other ways that you're seeing matter cycle. So you have carbon dioxide going into the plant, then also carbon dioxide coming out of this animal or even factories. And then you also see carbon dioxide being used in cellular respiration. So when we breathe that out, so you're seeing the nutrient is also, and then down here as sugars as it moves through the food chain, and then also how it's stored in fossil fuels. So you see it moving and cycling. It doesn't run out, but energy does. So remember, energy flows, matter cycles, or nutrient cycle. Okay, so let's get into 4.2. This first slide covers a lot of understandings. Notice it's 1, 2, 3, and 4. So the first understanding is right here. Aquatic and terrestrial communities rely on sunlight as a source of energy. So we're going to be getting into photosynthesis in this section, not today, but in this section of 3 topics. And sunlight is the key. Without sunlight, there would not be these energy flows occurring in ecosystems. So notice in this energy pyramid, you see sunlight at the base here. And in this picture here, it's showing you photosynthesis, which takes us into our next understanding. So light energy is converted to chemical energy in carbon compounds by photosynthesis. You need to be comfortable with those words, light energy and chemical energy. So light energy is going to be inorganic. So if you're looking at this picture here, which then converts into organic material, or what we would call sugar, which is chemical energy. So if you're looking at the picture of the leaf here, you can see you have carbon dioxide plus water and sunlight is going to then create chemical energy, which is sugar, which is C6H12O6, or glucose, as we've talked about it before, and the waste product of oxygen, which the plant releases, thank goodness, so we can breathe it. So through this process, the matter is cycled from light energy to chemical energy, and then back again. So it's always going from inorganic molecules to organic molecules, to inorganic to organic. Carbon is, but the energy is not. Okay, so the chemical energy eventually runs out and has to be created again. So that goes to our third understanding. Chemical energy in carbon compounds flow through food chains by feeding. So remember, flowing runs out. So eventually, and that's what this pyramid's for here, you're going to see that the plant makes its own energy, okay, and then it flows through the different consumers. So the transfer of energy, this is coming down to our fourth understanding, the transfer of energy from one trophic level to the next is inefficient. Notice I bolded some terms you need to pay attention to here. Inefficient because of how much energy is lost as it's moving through the food chain. So producers actually, we always say they produce 100% energy. Well, they produce 100% for themselves, technically, but of the amount of sunlight they're actually given, they only are converting about 1% of that solar energy to organic matter. So it's actually pretty inefficient as a process in a way. But since they make their own energy, they start off with 100% technically. Just remember that they only are converting about 1% of the sunlight given to them. That's why you're seeing down here 1 million joules of sunlight. So here's the plant. You can see they've only produced 1% of that amount, so 10,000 joules, into energy. Now, as it moves down through feeding, so when this is a grasshopper, eats this flower, it's only going to get about 10% of that energy. So you're seeing 1,000 joules there. Okay. Then energy is used to run cell activities for these animals. So then more energy is lost. So they're going through cellular respiration, trying to make their own ATP or energy. So they're using the sugar that the flower gave them, they're producing it into ATP so they can move. And then also we get hot as our metabolism is trying to help us do cellular respiration. So we release some of that energy as heat. So we lose it in two ways. So that leaves us with only about anywhere from 10 to 20%. So we usually just say 10, but it's not a perfect science. So it can be anywhere from 10 to 20%, depending on the animal, because some animals' metabolism are more efficient than others. So actually us, because we regulate our temperatures inside, we are less efficient because we're always using energy trying to maintain our body temperature, where other animals like lizards, for example, they do not have a thermoregulation. They either just sit in the sun or they sit in the shade, sit in the sun, sit in the shade. They don't waste as much energy trying to maintain their internal temperature. So those animals usually produce or get more energy through a food web than thermoregulator animals. So if you notice, it keeps going up and it's always 10% up to the highest trophic level. So this is also an argument for vegetarians often, is that you get more energy if you just consume plants, because so much energy is wasted as it moves through the food chain. So for example, if I'm eating a cow versus eating a salad, I technically am not getting as much energy as I would if I was eating that salad. So this is a big argument for vegetarianism. Okay, so this is 4.25 and 6, so flowing right along. So energy flows through the food chain, being lost at each stage due to respiration. And then remember, nutrients are recycled. So we're just going to go through this diagram really fast so you can visualize it. So here's the sun, the light energy producing inorganic or light energy, and then it's going to become chemical energy here with the producers. Producers also lose some of the energy as heat when they do respiration, because plants also do respiration. Then they're also taking in nutrients. So they're taking in some of that inorganic nutrients in the soil in order to grow. They're going to pass these nutrients, the now chemical energy, to consumers. But plants will also die. So their death or their debris is going to be broken down by decomposers as well. So they're getting energy from plants that way. They also are losing heat as they decompose, and they're turning that chemical energy back into, well, not light energy, but they're turning it from organic to inorganic again. Also notice up here, the consumer is losing heat as well. So this is showing you how energy is flowing through a food chain and how it is lost and why it runs out and it's not recycled, where nutrients are being recycled by decomposers like carbon by itself or nitrogen by itself or phosphorus by itself. But we're not seeing sugar being recycled. Okay, so the last understanding. So energy losses between trophic levels restrict the length of food chains and the biomass of higher trophic levels. So basically what that is saying is, like I brought up in the very beginning of the lecture, is there can't be as much biomass at the top of a food chain because there's not enough energy to support that. So in this picture here, you're seeing just a diagram trying to show you where the inputs and the outputs are. So remember, energy is lost enough because sometimes it's not consumed before the organism dies, or it's not absorbed or assimilated, broken down basically. So the I stands for input, the A stands for assimilation, like going through respiration. R stands for respiration, like it's being released, CO2. NU means it didn't get used. and then production is here. So this would be just, this box is representing plants. So notice it's a bigger box, and notice down here at the bottom, this is a trophic level pyramid, at least a side of it. And you're seeing that it is a wider or thicker part right here because there's more energy at the base of a food chain. So you're seeing the input of the sunlight coming in as light energy, and then there's assimilation. They're making their sugars. They release CO2 through cell respiration, and then this is, the B stands for how much biomass they are, and this is what's not used, like released as heat. So now the production is going to be given to the next consumer, which are herbivores. Notice the box is smaller for representing their biomass, and you can see the same inputs, assimilation, production, respiration's happening, and some's not being used because of heat, and it moves to the carnivores, which is an even smaller box. So notice that on this pyramid, it's thicker, and then it gets thinner. So it's on its side, this pyramid. And then here's the third level here. This is showing you just within a snail the same idea. So ingestion, so the input, assimilation, it's making its energy, production of the ATP, and then this is its biomass, losing through respiration and feces as well. Oops. And then this would be moving it down on the food chain. So just remember, energy is lost because of all these different outputs. So pyramids of energy, one of the skills you have to be able to do is to analyze and quantify. So if you're given a table of data, you should be able to analyze the different, or which pyramid represents that data. For example, you're not going to be asked to draw them, but you're going to be asked to try to match it to data. So pyramids are always given in 3 units. So they're pretty heavy here. So energy amount, the amount of area or land or space that they're covering, and the unit of time. So here's an example: kilojoules, it's usually kilojoules, meters squared, and years. So it's usually always kilojoules, but meters squared, years. These would change depending on what you're researching. So pyramids should be stepped. So notice this is like a step here. These are steps like you're walking up a staircase. They should not look like a triangle. The labels should always, they shouldn't say first trophic level, second trophic level. They should say primary producer, primary consumer, secondary consumer, and tertiary consumer. Okay, so you can see that each of these, so at the bottom you have the amount of sunlight coming in, but the plant only converted 1% of that sunlight, so that's 10,000. And then from there, it starts at 100% again in a way, because it's what it created itself. And then it moves up, only 10% moved to the primary consumer, only 10% then moved to the secondary consumer, and then only 10% moved to the tertiary consumer. So sometimes pyramids can come in a couple forms. We are mostly only having to look at pyramid of energy, but realize that there are a few other types. So this would be a pyramid of numbers, okay? This just means how many species are in the ecosystem. So you're seeing in this food chain, there's only one tree that all of these species live off of. That's why it's so small on the bottom, because it's one tree. But then there's many flies and many spiders and a few birds. So you don't see these very often. If you ever see a smaller bottom part of the pyramid, you're probably looking at a pyramid of numbers. Pyramid of biomass is how much of these organisms there are, like how much sugar, right? Chemical energy is built within each organism for storage. Okay, so this is looking at a sink. And then this would be showing the pyramid of energy. So you should see it getting 10% less every time. This is too equal. This is too balanced. This is showing an energy flow. You could also construct a pyramid on Excel if you were to look at it. So this is the data here, and it's representing freshwater springs in Florida, USA. So if you had to do this, you would only half the amount of data, because on the other side of the chart, it's going to be the other half. So this is 50,000 because the first number is 100,000. So the other side of the 0 would be 50,000, and I'll show you that in a second, because then it would total up to 100,000. Notice the next step down is not exactly 10%, because it's always between 10 to 20%. So this is a little bit higher than 10%. And then this is actually a 10% exchange. So you're seeing it go to this point here, and it's half each time. So half of 7,500. So this is only half of it because the other half's going to be on the other side. So let me show you what I mean. So now you can see the full 100,000, the whole 15,000, if you were to make these on Excel. Okay, the last slide. So ecological productivity is going to come up in C2, so I wanted to just talk about it now. When you look at because what an ecological pyramid is showing you is the productivity. So the word gross primary production, or GPP, is the amount of chemical energy as biomass that a producer creates in a given length of time. So gross is like the total. The net primary production is the amount of chemical energy that is not consumed by respiration. So that's not lost or wasted. So here you can see this was the primary amount, but they lost, this cherry or plant lost 100 joules through cell respiration or as heat. So what they're left with in their biomass tissue is 200 joules. So this primary producer is starting off with 200 joules to share with this caterpillar. So then if you go to secondary productivity, as it moves to the next trophic level, the primary consumer. So there was 200 joules that it consumed, but it lost 100 joules for its feces and 67 joules in heat doing cellular respiration to make ATP. So what it was left with was only about 33 joules from that cherry. So this is a little higher than 10%, but remember it's usually between 10 and 20%. So this is ecological productivity. Okay, so that's what's happening, and I want you to see that energy is flowing. It's not being recycled because it is lost and eventually becomes less and less and less. Okay, so that is it for today. Let me know if you have any questions. Please make sure you take your notes and post them into ManageBack now. Have a good day, you guys.